One man's trash is another man's treasure, and that's exactly what happened here. Somebody tossed out this vintage faux bamboo armoire made by American in Martinsville, but not before slapping on some paint that looks, well, let's just say it wasn't flattering. So on this week's episode, I will be showing y'all how I turn trash into cash. First things first, I check for any damage to the doors and the drawers before numbering them and taking off all of the hardware. I used to store all of my hardware, screws, and hinges in a plastic bag, but I found that this shoebox that I got from Walmart for a couple bucks works just fine. I like it because it has a lid and it's big enough that I can find it easily when I need it. Before I scrub this piece down, I grabbed my shop vac to suck up as much dust and grime as I could. I'm sure you guys didn't want to hear all that. I started with 80 grit sandpaper because not only was the brown paint a thick orange peel texture, but there were also a lot of dents in it. I figured it was best to smooth everything out, even if that meant sanding down to the factory finish in some parts. Now, you're probably wondering why I didn't strip this piece. Honestly, I didn't want to buy stripper. And it would have been a total mess trying to strip all of that paint off. Luckily, the paint came off pretty easily. And whatever was left was adhere well enough to help even out things. My surf prep with the spongy cushion attachment pad to sand all along the bamboo parts. Afterwards, I moved forward with sanding the doors and the drawers. After sanding the dovetails, I checked to see if any of them needed to be re-glued and clamped down. I prepped the piece for patching, like taping off all of the drawer holes since we'll be using different hardware, and covering up any other imperfections that I found. I went with Mondo because it cures super fast, so I didn't have to wait long before sanding it smooth. Bondo is a two-part system, and you want to keep it separate until you are ready to mix and patch. I just mix a little bit at a time since it hardens so quickly, and I could always just mix more when I need it. Next, I focused on the holes that held up the hinges on the doors. A few of them needed to be glued and clamped back together since the MDF was splitting. I just ordered some syringes off of Amazon, which allowed me to get plenty of glue into the holes and where it was splitting. Once the glue was fully dry, I used wood filler to patch the rest. After that, I sanded the entire piece with 120 grit, especially the areas I patched with Bondo. 120 grit is rough enough to smooth out that Bondo, but you can also get away with using it as your final sanding step before priming. But just as long as you're not going for a high gloss finish though. And don't think I skipped hand sanding. Yes, I did use my orbital and surf prep, but hand sanding is key for those small details that my sanders can't reach. I vacuumed up any leftover paint dust from sanding and wiped the entire piece down with a rag in warm water. I decided to use Ben Shellac primer because it sticks to just about anything and gives me great protection. But their spray cans are getting way too expensive, so I switched to using my sprayer instead. My sprayer is by Wagner and it's their Flexio 5000 model. Now, Wagner advises against using shellac in their sprayers since it's flammable, but personally, I feel comfortable spraying it in this model. There's no actual plug or motor attached to this part, which means I can take it apart and clean it thoroughly with household ammonia without any issues. And since there's no plug or motor attached to this area, I feel like I don't have to worry about any risk of sparking a flame. Plus, this model lets you buy extra nozzles and containers, so I have one that's specifically for shellac primer. But just because I feel comfortable doing this doesn't mean you should. Please use your own discretion and maybe talk to your sprayer manufacturer. And with all honesty, you can always roll it on instead. This clip shows how I prep my doors for spraying. I drilled small holes at the bottom, skirted in some hooks, and hung them up. That way, I can spray all sides at once without any problems. Once the primer was completely dry, I inspected the entire piece to check for any additional spots that needed patching. Unsurprisingly, there were quite a few. It was difficult to spot all of the imperfections between the factory finish and that brown paint, but luckily the white primer really highlighted all of those imperfections. I then hand sanded the wood filler completely smooth once it was completely dry so it could be prepared for paint. I had some leftover wallpaper from a previous project that I wanted to use for this piece. So right away I knew I wanted the inside to be white and the outside blue to match the wallpaper that I planned to put on the new backing. I did about 3 coats of pure white that I already had on hand, then finished it off with a satin top coat. The original backing was a mess from the old paint job. So instead of sanding it down, I cut backing I already had to size. This way I saved time and ensure a smooth surface for the wallpaper, which I applied the wallpaper off camera, so sorry about that. But once it was on, I nailed it in place with my nail gun. After letting the paint fully dry for a couple days, I tape along the entire edge, leaving about an 1/8 inch gap from the outer edge. Starting with the edges made it much easier to quickly tape off the rest without having to perfectly line everything up. Once that was done, I sprayed clear shellac along the edges to create a barrier between the blue paint and the tape. This will ensure a sharp and crisp line when the tape is removed, instead of the blue bleeding through underneath. And for the life of me, I cannot find that swatch that told me the name of this blue, so once I do find it, I'll just pop up the name somewhere on the screen. I sprayed 3 coats of blue over the entire piece, which just about used up the whole quart. And well, you know, I guess it makes sense since this was a pretty big piece. Once that was done, I mixed in satin polyacrylic with the little bit of paint remaining in the sprayer to seal everything in. While I had to spray the original knobs, I was able to just soak the hinges in acetone to strip off the brown paint and reveal the gold underneath. Once the paint dried, I drilled new holes for the exposed drawers because a lot of the original hardware was missing, and I had bought new pulls to replace them. I actually ended up spraying the hinges with 1 coat of champagne bronze to better match their hardware. This clip just shows me marking where to drill the new holes for the hinges since I had to patch the original holes. After attaching the hinges to the doors, it was time to remove the covering and attach them to the frame. Finally, all that was left was attaching the new magnetic door catcher to keep the doors securely in place. Alright y'all, so here is a reminder of what it looked like before, and here's the final results. I'm really happy with how this piece turned out, especially considering where it started. It is much smoother, the doors are fully functional now, and best of all, it's gone to a home that will cherish it for many more years. Now let's talk about the numbers. Y'all already know that I got this piece for free. I used about half of the can of the primer, so that was $10.82. The blue paint was $27.35. The new pools were $17.37. But everything else that I used on this piece, like the Bondo, white paint, and top coat, I already had on hand and they were paid in full, leaving my material cost to be $55.54. I originally had this listed for $6.50 for a couple of weeks, but ended up dropping it to $4.25 to sell it quickly, since I had several commission pieces coming up and needed the space. Luckily, after that, it sold within a couple of days at the new asking price, leaving my profit to be $369.46 and averaging about $18.47 an hour for this piece. But alright y'all, you know the drill. Stay tuned for the next one.